The rain in Seattle didn't just fall. It blurred the edges of the world until everything looked like a smudged watercolor painting. Inside the brightly lit clinical interior of the King County Administration Building, Clara Lynn stood by the window, watching the drops race down the glass. She was clutching a damp manila folder containing her birth certificate, a copy of her apartment lease, and a freshly printed unsigned marriage license. 10 minutes ago, her fiancé of 4 years, now ex-fiancé, had sent a text message that read, "I can't do this. The merger with my father's firm requires me to be in New York by tonight. And honestly, Clara, we're more like business partners than lovers. Let's just call it." It was cold. It was efficient. It was entirely typical of Julian Vance. The real kicker wasn't the broken heart. It was the suffocating reality of her grandfather's will. The late eccentric patriarch of the Lynn family had left his sprawling, debt-free organic tea estate to Clara on one non-negotiable condition. She must be married before her 28th birthday to secure the funding needed to keep the estate from being liquidated by her greedy step-uncle. Her 28th birthday was tomorrow. "Miss Lynn," the clerk at the counter called out, her voice dripping with the exhaustion of a Friday afternoon. "Your appointment window is closing. Is your partner here yet?" "No," Clara said, her voice sounding hollow even to herself. "He's not coming." "I'm sorry to hear that. I'll have to cancel the application." "Wait." The voice came from the bench just behind Clara. It was deep, resonant, and carried a strange, gravelly weight that made her turn around instantly. The man who stood up was tall, easily 6'2", wearing a tailored charcoal overcoat that looked expensive despite being dark with rainwater at the shoulders. His jawline looked like it had been chiseled out of granite by an artist who specialized in unyielding expressions. His hair was jet black, slightly damp, and pushed back from a forehead that bore a faint silver scar near the temple. But it was his eyes that caught her. They were a piercing, stormy gray. "Are you looking for a husband, Miss Lynn?" the stranger asked. There was no mockery in his tone. It was entirely transactional, like a man asking if a seat at a conference table was taken. Clara blinked, her hand tightening on her manila folder. "Excuse me?" "You need a marriage certificate by today, presumably for a legal or financial reason, given your timing," the man said, stepping forward. The scent of rain, cedarwood, and rich espresso followed him. "I need a marriage certificate by 5 p.m. today to satisfy a clause in my grandfather's trust, ensuring my half-siblings don't take control of my company. It seems we have a mutual problem with a singular solution." Clara stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You're insane. I don't even know your name." "Ethan Vance," he said, offering a long-fingered, steady hand. Clara froze. "Vance, are you related to Julian Vance?" Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, a flash of cold amusement crossing his features. "Julian is my cousin, the weak-willed one who prefers New York skyscrapers to actual work. I take it he's the one who left you stranded?" "Yes," Clara whispered, stunned by the sheer cosmic irony of the moment. "Then marrying me serves as excellent poetic justice, don't you think?" Ethan checked a heavy platinum watch on his wrist. "It is 4:15 p.m. We have 45 minutes before the courthouse closes. I have a prenuptial agreement already drafted in my briefcase. Standard terms, total separation of assets, no claims on each other's inheritances, and a mandatory dissolution clause after 24 months. He looked at her, his gray eyes piercing through her panic. "Do we have a deal, Clara?" She looked at the marriage license in her hand. She thought of her grandfather's tea fields, the legacy she had promised to protect. Then she looked at Ethan Vance, a man who looked dangerous, powerful, and utterly reliable in his ruthlessness. "On one condition," Clara said, her voice steadying. "We live together. The trust investigators will check. It has to look real." Ethan's lips curved into a micro-expression that might have been a smile on a less formidable man. "Agreed. I have a house in Madison Park. There's plenty of room. He turned to the stunned clerk at the desk. We're ready to file. Chapter 2. The 2-year contract. The ink on the marriage certificate was barely dry when Ethan's sleek black Maybach pulled up to the curb of the courthouse. A driver in a crisp suit jumped out to open the door. But Ethan waved him off, opening the door for Clara himself. Your things, Ethan said as the car melted into the Seattle traffic. Where are they? My apartment in Capitol Hill, Clara said, staring at the gold band on her left ring finger. It wasn't hers. Ethan had produced a simple, elegant band from his vest pocket during the ceremony. It fit perfectly, which felt deeply unsettling. But my lease isn't up until the end of the month. My assistant will handle the lease breakout fee and move your belongings tomorrow morning, Ethan said smoothly, opening a sleek leather folio on his lap. He handed her a fountain pen and a document. This is the agreement we discussed. Clara took the papers. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, looking for the traps she assumed a man like Ethan Vance would hide. Section 4.2. Marital Cohabitation. The parties agree to maintain a shared primary residence to satisfy external legal scrutiny. However, the parties shall maintain separate private quarters. Neither party shall expect or demand physical intimacy. Section 7.1. Financial Autonomy. Clara Lynn retains 100% ownership of the Lynn T estate and all associated properties. Ethan Vance retains 100% ownership of Vance Holdings. Neither party shall be liable for the other's debts. Clara looked up, meeting his steady gaze. You're incredibly prepared for a spontaneous marriage. I don't believe in spontaneity, Ethan replied. I believe in contingency plans. Julian's flightiness has been a liability to the family firm for years. I knew he would bolt. I didn't know he would leave someone like you behind. Someone like me? Someone who values her legacy enough to marry a stranger to save it. Sign, Clara. Let's get our lives back on track. Clara pressed the pen to the paper. With a swift, elegant stroke, she signed her name next to his. Clara Vance. The letters looked foreign, almost mocking. Welcome to the family, Ethan said, taking the papers back and tucking them away. Now, let's go home. Chapter 3. The Fortress in Madison Park. The Vance estate in Madison Park was less of a house and more of a modern fortress, constructed of glass, steel, and dark cedar. It overlooked Lake Washington, the gray water blending seamlessly with the evening sky. You live here alone? Clara asked, as Ethan led her through a soaring, minimalist foyer. I prefer the quiet, he said, shedding his overcoat and draping it over a chair. Beneath it, his tailored suit fit his broad shoulders perfectly. There is a full-time housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, who comes in the mornings. I've already notified her of our change in circumstances. What did you tell her? The truth, that we got married today, Ethan said, turning to face her. The details are irrelevant to her. She will respect your privacy. He led her up a floating glass staircase to the second floor, stopping outside a massive set of double oak doors. This is the master suite. It's mine. Your quarters are across the hall. He opened the opposite door to reveal a stunning, expansive bedroom with its own fireplace, a king-sized bed wrapped in ivory linens, and a wall of windows facing the lake. A bouquet of fresh white orchids sat on the dresser. I hope this is acceptable, Ethan said. It's bigger than my entire apartment, Clara said honestly. She walked to the window, watching the rain beat against the glass. The reality of what she had done was finally beginning to crash down on her. She was married, to a billionaire, to her ex-fiancé's terrifying, enigmatic cousin, Clara. She turned around. Ethan was standing in the doorway, his hands shoved into his trouser pockets. The harsh corporate edge to his demeanor had softened just a fraction. You've had a traumatic day, he said quietly. Your fiancé abandoned you, and you married a stranger to protect your grandfather's dream. I don't expect you to be joyful, but you are safe here. My family cannot touch you, and Julian cannot crawl back to you. We are partners now. Clara felt a sudden, unexpected lump in her throat. She nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you, Ethan." "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow, the real work begins. We have to introduce our marriage to the world." Chapter 4. The Family Dinner. 3 weeks passed in a blur of quiet routine. True to his word, Ethan's assistant had moved Clara's belongings into the Madison Park house with military efficiency. Clara spent her days working remotely, managing the supply chains for the Lynn T estate, while Ethan left for the Vance Holdings tower before dawn and returned long after dark. They were like two ships passing in a luxurious silent night, until the invitation arrived. "A gala?" Clara asked that evening, looking across the long dining table at Ethan. They were eating a dinner of roasted salmon that Mrs. Gable had left for them. "The Vance Foundation's annual charity event," Ethan said, cutting his fish with precise movements. "My grandfather will be there, so will my step-aunt, and more importantly, Julian." Clara's fork paused in midair. "Julian is back from New York?" "The merger concluded early," Ethan said, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "He expects to return to a promotion and a hero's welcome. He does not know about us yet. Legal records of marriages take a few weeks to become public standard in our social circles, and I've kept our filing flagged for privacy." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "Are we going to blindside them?" "We are going to establish our narrative," Ethan corrected smoothly. "We fell in love quickly while Julian was neglecting you. It was a whirlwind romance. Scandalous, perhaps, but romantic. It protects your reputation from being the abandoned fiancé and protects my position as the stable, decisive head of the family." He reached into his pocket and placed a small velvet box on the table between them. "Your engagement ring," he said. "The band from the courthouse was temporary." Clara opened the box. Resting on the black velvet was a flawless, 5-carat emerald-cut diamond, flanked by tapered baguettes. It was breathtaking, arrogant, and unmistakably expensive. "Ethan, this is too much," she whispered. "Julian gave you a 2-carat round cut that he had his secretary pick out," Ethan said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a dark, possessive edge she hadn't heard before. "If we are playing a part, Clara, we play it to win. Put it on." With trembling fingers, Clara slid the heavy diamond onto her ring finger. It felt like a gilded handcuff, but as she looked at Ethan, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't entirely sure she wanted the key. Chapter 5. The Snake Pit. The grand ballroom at the Four Seasons was a sea of silk, diamonds, and high society whispers. Clara stood at the top of the grand staircase, her hand resting on the crisp wool of Ethan's tuxedo sleeve. She wore a backless, emerald-green slinky silk gown that complemented her dark hair and fair skin. Around her neck was a delicate diamond river, on loan from the Vance family vault. "Ready?" Ethan murmured, his head tilting down toward her. To anyone watching, it looked like a husband sharing an intimate whisper with his bride. "No," Clara admitted honestly, "but let's do it anyway." As they descended the stairs, the sea of guests parted. The whisper started almost instantly. Clara kept her chin high, her eyes fixed forward, until she spotted the group standing near the ice sculpture. Julian Vance looked exactly as he had 3 weeks ago, handsome in a boyish, unblemished way, sipping champagne and laughing at a joke made by his mother, Victoria. Then Julian looked up. His eyes found Clara, and a smile began to form on his face, the arrogant smile of a man who assumed he could always whistle and bring his dog back. But as his gaze shifted to Ethan, and then to Clara's hand resting securely on Ethan's arm, the smile died. "Clara," Julian stepped forward, his brow furrowing. "What are you doing here, and why are you with my cousin?" "Julian," Clara said, her voice smooth and devoid of the pain she thought she would feel, "it's good to see you. I believe congratulations are in order for your New York merger." Victoria Vance, a woman whose face had been pulled taut by years of expensive plastic surgery, stepped in. "Ethan, what is the meaning of this? Why is this girl on your arm? Julian told us the wedding was called off." "It was," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the ballroom. Several nearby investors paused their conversations to listen. Julian called it off, which left Clara free to accept a proposal from a man who actually understands her worth. Julian's face went white. "What are you talking about?" Ethan raised Clara's left hand, the 5-carat emerald-cut diamond catching the crystal chandeliers and throwing dazzling shards of light across Julian's face. "Clara and I were married 3 weeks ago," Ethan announced clearly. "She is now Mrs. Ethan Vance. I suggest you address your sister-in-law with the appropriate respect, Julian." A collective gasp seemed to ripple through the immediate circle. Julian looked as if he had been struck. You married him? Clara, we were together for 4 years. I sent you one text because I was stressed about work. And in doing so, you showed me exactly where I stood, Clara said, her voice ringing with a newfound confidence. She looked up at Ethan, and for a split second, the act felt entirely real. Ethan showed me what a real man looks like, one who doesn't run away when things get complicated. "This is absurd," Victoria hissed. "Grandfather will never allow this. It's a farce." "Grandfather already approved the trust distribution this morning," Ethan said, his voice dripping with cool triumph. "The Vance Holdings chairmanship is locked. Have a good evening, Aunt Victoria, Julian." With a smooth turn, Ethan guided Clara away, leaving his relatives staring after them in ruined silence. Chapter 6. The Crack in the Armor. Back in the Maybach, the adrenaline finally washed out of Clara's system, leaving her shaking. She collapsed against the leather seats, pulling the faux fur stole tighter around her shoulders. "You did exceptionally well," Ethan said, watching her from across the dark cabin. He reached into the small bar built into the armrest and poured her a finger of amber bourbon. "It helps with the come-down." Clara took the glass, her fingers brushing his. A strange electric spark shot up her arm, and she quickly pulled back, taking a sip of the burning liquid. "Julian looked like he was going to throw up," Clara murmured. "He deserves worse," Ethan said darkly. "He has always taken what he wanted and discarded what he grew bored of. He didn't deserve the estate, and he certainly didn't deserve you." Clara looked out the window at the passing city lights. "We lied to everyone tonight, Ethan. We told them we fell in love." It was a necessary narrative. "But what happens when the 2 years are up?" Clara asked, turning her head to look at him. "What happens when we divorce? Won't they think it was all a lie anyway?" Ethan was silent for a long moment. The shadows of the passing streetlights danced across his sharp features, making him look distant, almost unreachable. "In 2 years," Ethan said slowly, "my position at the firm will be unassailable. Your tea estate will be fully funded and protected. What the world thinks of our divorce won't matter, because we will both have won." "Right," Clara said, ignoring the sudden heavy ache in her chest. "Winning, that's what matters." When they arrived back at the Madison Park Fortress, Ethan didn't immediately go to his room. Instead, he followed Clara into the kitchen as she went to pour a glass of water. The house was dark, lit only by the ambient glow of the moon hitting Lake Washington through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Clara," Ethan said, standing near the island. He had discarded his tuxedo jacket and undone the top 2 buttons of his white shirt, looking more unraveled and more devastatingly attractive than she had ever seen him. "Yes? When Julian spoke to you tonight, did you feel anything?" Clara paused, the water glass halfway to her lips. She looked at this strange, powerful man who had entered her life like a hurricane and rewritten her entire destiny in the span of an afternoon. "I felt angry," Clara said honestly, stepping closer to him. "But not because I missed him. I was angry that I wasted 4 years with a boy when I could have been looking for a man." Ethan's eyes darkened, the stormy gray turning to deep charcoal. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them until Clara could feel the heat radiating from his chest. He reached out, his large, warm hand cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone with an unexpected gentleness that made her breath catch. "This wasn't part of the contract," Ethan murmured, his voice a low, rough whisper against the quiet of the house. "The contract can be amended," Clara whispered back. Ethan didn't hesitate. He leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was nothing like the clinical, business-like arrangement they had agreed to. It was fierce, possessive, and filled with a hunger that had been building behind closed doors for 3 long weeks. As Clara spun her fingers into his thick, dark hair, pulling him closer, she realized that the flash marriage she had entered to save her past had just become the only future she ever wanted. Chapter 7. The morning after the amendment. The rain had finally stopped by morning, leaving the Seattle sky a crisp, pale blue that reflected off Lake Washington like a sheet of glass. Clara woke up wrapped in the ivory linens of her own bed, but the space beside her was empty. For a terrifying 10 seconds, she wondered if the heat of the previous night had been a vivid, adrenaline-induced dream. But then she smelled it. The rich, unmistakable scent of French press coffee and toasted sourdough drifting up from the kitchen. She threw on a plush cream cardigan over her silk slip and walked down the floating glass staircase. Ethan was standing by the kitchen island, already dressed in a charcoal gray button-down shirt, though his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing the lean, corded muscle of his forearms. He was looking at his iPad, typing something with one hand while holding a coffee mug in the other. When he heard her footsteps, he paused and looked up. The cool, unreadable mask he usually wore at the office was missing. Instead, his gray eyes softened, tracing her face with a quiet intensity. "Good morning," he said, setting his mug down. "Morning," Clara said, suddenly feeling fiercely self-conscious about her messy hair and lack of makeup. "You're still here. I thought you'd be at the tower by 6 a.m. "I pushed my morning meetings back," Ethan said, sliding a freshly poured cup of coffee toward her. "I thought we should talk about the new terms of our agreement." Clara took a sip of the coffee, letting the warmth settle her nerves. "The amendment?" Ethan walked around the island, stopping just inches from her. He reached out, his fingers catching a stray lock of her dark hair and gently tucking it behind her ear. His touch was just as electric as it had been the night before. "There is no amendment, Clara," he murmured, his voice low and steady, "because an amendment implies we are still bound by a business contract. Last night wasn't business." Clara's heart did a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. "Then what is it?" "It's real," Ethan said clearly. "I didn't marry you just because of a clause in my grandfather's trust, Clara. I had 3 other women my step-aunt was trying to force on me, any of whom would have satisfied the legal requirement. I chose to step up to that courthouse counter because I've watched you build your tea legacy from nothing for the last 2 years. I knew exactly who you were, and I knew my cousin was too blind to see what he had." Clara stared at him, her breath hitching. You knew who I was before that day?" "I did," Ethan admitted, a faint, rueful smile touching his lips. "Though I didn't expect Julian to give me the perfect opportunity to steal you away. But now that you're here, under my roof, wearing my ring, I have no intention of letting you go in 2 years, contract or no contract." Before Clara could process the sheer weight of his confession, the sharp buzz of Ethan's work phone broke the silence. He glanced down at the screen. The caller ID read, "Julian." Ethan's eyes narrowed, the warmth instantly vanishing, replaced by the calculating predator she had met at the courthouse. He picked up the phone and slid the answer bar. "Julian," Ethan said, his voice dropping into a chillingly polite tone. "You're calling early." Clara held her breath, able to hear Julian's muffled, frantic voice bleeding through the receiver. "Ethan, what the hell is going on? My mother is hysterical. She thinks you engineered this whole thing to cut us out of the board seat. And Clara won't answer her phone. Let me talk to her." Ethan looked at Clara, offering her the phone with a raised eyebrow. Clara took a deep breath, took the phone from Ethan's hand, and put it to her ear. "I'm right here, Julian." Chapter 8. Cutting the Ties. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Clara, thank God. Look, last night was a nightmare. Ethan is using you. He's using this fake marriage to lock down the chairmanship from grandfather. You need to get out of there. Come to my apartment. Let's talk about this like adults." Clara looked at Ethan, who was watching her with total calmness. giving her the space to fight her own battle. She felt a sudden wave of clarity. The man on the phone sounded like a petulant child throwing a tantrum over a toy he had discarded and suddenly wanted back. "Julian," Clara said, her voice dropping all remnants of hesitation. "My marriage isn't fake, and Ethan didn't use me. He saved me from the humiliation you left me in." "Clara, be realistic. We were together for 4 years. You don't just fall in love with a stranger in 3 weeks." "I didn't fall in love with a stranger," Clara said, looking directly into Ethan's gray eyes. "I fell in love with a man who shows up, something you never learned how to do. Do not call my phone again. If you have business with the Lynn T estate, you can go through my legal team." Without waiting for his response, she tapped the red button, ending the call, and handed the device back to Ethan. Ethan took the phone, a slow, dark satisfaction spreading across his face. Incredible. "He's going to try something, isn't he?" Clara asked, the reality of high society warfare creeping back in. "Your aunt and Julian, they won't just let you take the chairmanship without a fight." "Let them try," Ethan said, stepping closer and wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. "They are fighting for a title. They've already lost." Chapter 9. The Lynn Estate Crisis. By the following week, the domestic bliss of the Madison Park house was fractured by a sudden emergency. Clara was in her home office, surrounded by spreadsheets, when her phone rang. It was her plantation manager from the Lynn T estate, in absolute panic. "Miss Lynn, sorry, Mrs. Vance," the manager stuttered. "We have a massive problem. The supply trucks from our primary distributor just pulled out. They broke the contract. They said an anonymous buyer paid out their exit penalties and bought up their entire fleet for the next 6 months. Our premium summer harvest is sitting in the fermentation barns right now. If we don't get it to the processing facilities in 48 hours, the whole crop will rot." Clara's blood ran cold. "Who bought out the fleet, Marcus?" "They wouldn't give a name, ma'am. Just a shell corporation based out of Delaware. But the timing, it's malicious." Clara hung up, her hands trembling. Victoria Vance. It had to be. It was a direct retaliatory strike against her for humiliating Julian and securing Ethan's trust fund. By bankrupting the Lynn estate before the inheritance funds officially cleared, they could force Clara into a financial crisis, creating a scandal that would make Ethan look unstable to his board of directors. She stood up so fast, her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. She needed to find a logistics company, immediately. Before she could reach the door, it opened. Ethan stood there, holding his suit jacket over his arm. He had clearly heard her pacing from down the hall. "What's wrong?" he asked, his sharp eyes immediately registering her pale face. "Victoria is moving against the estate," Clara said, her voice tight with suppressed anger. She quickly explained the distributor buyout. "If I lose this harvest, the estate goes into default before the probate court finishes processing my grandfather's will next month. The greedy step-uncle gets the land, and it all gets paved over for luxury condos." Ethan listened, his jaw tightening until a vein throbbed at his temple. "They think they can play dirty in my territory." He pulled out his phone and speed-dialed a number. "Marcus, this is Ethan Vance. Connect me to your logistics coordinator at the estate." Clara watched as Ethan paced her office, speaking in a low, authoritative tone that brooked no argument. "I don't care about the standard routes," Ethan told the person on the other end. "I am dispatching 30 temperature-controlled freight trucks from Vance Logistics Commercial Division. They will arrive at the Lynn Fields by midnight tonight. Load the crop. We are bypassing the regional processing plants entirely. I am opening the Vance Private Distribution Hub in Oregon for Clara's harvest." He paused, listening to the coordinator's shocked response. "Yes, the private hub," Ethan commanded. "And tell the local distributors that if anyone refuses to carry Lynn T products moving forward, Vance Holdings will pull all commercial real estate leases from their parent companies by tomorrow afternoon. Am I understood?" He hung up and tossed the phone onto Clara's desk. Clara stared at him, her mouth slightly open. You just redirected an entire corporate logistics fleet for a tea harvest. I told you, Ethan said, walking over to her and cupping her face in his hands, forcing her to look up into his fierce, unyielding gaze. No one touches what belongs to me, and that includes your grandfather's dream. The Lynn estate is under the Vance umbrella now, Clara. More importantly, it's under my protection. Clara felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the overwhelming, dizzying realization that for the first time in her life, she didn't have to carry the weight of the world entirely on her own shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, wrapping her arms around his neck. Ethan held her tight, buried his face in her hair, and whispered against her skin, "We're going to crush them, sweetheart, completely." Chapter 10. The Ultimate Checkmate. The monthly board of directors meeting for Vance Holdings was held on the top floor of the glass skyscraper downtown. The atmosphere inside the boardroom was thick with tension. Victoria Vance sat at the long mahogany table, looking smug, while Julian sat next to her, adjusting his tie with nervous fingers. They believed they had Ethan backed into a corner. A rumor of the Lynn estate's impending logistics failure had been carefully leaked to the board members to prove Ethan had married into a financial liability. The double doors swung open, and Ethan walked in. But he wasn't alone. Clara walked beside him, wearing a tailored sharp white power suit that radiated executive authority. Her dark hair was pulled back into a sleek professional bun, and the 5-carat emerald diamond on her hand flashed under the recessed ceiling lights. "Ethan," the elderly board chairman said, clearing his throat, "we didn't expect your wife to join the executive session. Mrs. Vance is here because her assets are now legally intertwined with the family trust," Ethan said, taking his seat at the head of the table. Clara sat directly to his right, her posture flawless. Victoria sneered across the table. "Intertwined assets? More like a sinking ship, Ethan. We've all seen the reports. The Lynn estate is facing massive supply chain failures. Is this the kind of chaotic baggage you're bringing into Vance Holdings as chair?" Julian spoke up, trying to look strong in front of the board. "It's a liability, grandfather. Ethan rushed into a flash marriage with a woman whose company is on the verge of collapse just to beat the trust deadline." Clara didn't wait for Ethan to defend her. She leaned forward, placing a sleek leather folder onto the center of the table, and sliding it toward the chairman. "I think your information is outdated, Victoria," Clara said, her voice smooth, icy, and completely commanding. "If you look at the Q2 logistics report inside that folder, you'll see that the Lynn Tea Estate has just finalized an exclusive direct-to-consumer distribution partnership utilizing Vance Logistics' West Coast infrastructure." The chairman flipped the folder open, his eyebrows rising. "My God, the projected margins have tripled." "Not only is the summer harvest fully processed," Clara continued, locking eyes with a stunned Julian, "but we have signed a contract to supply our premium matcha lines to the entire Pacific Northwest luxury hotel circuit. A deal that was secured using the capital liberated by my grandfather's fully approved will this morning. The Lynn estate is entirely debt-free, highly profitable, and officially a major asset to the Vance portfolio." The boardroom went dead silent. Julian's mouth opened slightly, his face draining of color. Victoria looked as if she had swallowed a lemon. Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, dangerous smile appearing on his face as he looked at his defeated family members. "It seems the rumors of my wife's liability were vastly exaggerated," Ethan said softly, though his voice filled every corner of the massive room. "Now, shall we vote on the permanent chairmanship, or does anyone else want to question my choice of partner?" The chairman didn't hesitate. He raised his hand. "All in favor of Ethan Vance as permanent chairman of the board?" Every single hand in the room went up, except for Victoria's and Julian's. "Motion carries," the chairman declared. "Congratulations, Chairman Vance." Epilogue: The New Legacy. That evening the Madison Park house was completely quiet. The storm clouds had cleared entirely, leaving a brilliant starlit sky over Lake Washington. Clara stood out on the wide wooden deck, a mug of warm, freshly brewed tea from her own estate nestled between her hands. She felt lighter than she had in years. The estate was safe. Her grandfather's dream was secure. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her from behind, pulling her back against a warm, solid chest. Ethan rested his chin on her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. "You were terrifying in that boardroom today," Ethan murmured, his voice laced with deep pride. "The board members are already more afraid of you than they are of me." Clara laughed softly, leaning into his embrace. "I had a good teacher. You know, when we stood in that courthouse a month ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I was signing away my freedom to a dangerous stranger." Ethan turned her around in his arms, his gray eyes reflecting the moonlight and the deep, undeniable devotion he held for her. He reached down, taking her left hand and kissing the heavy diamond ring on her finger. "And now?" he asked softly. Clara looked up at her husband, the stranger she had married on a whim, the man who had become her shelter, her partner, and her greatest love. "And now," Clara said, a beautiful, brilliant smile breaking across her face as she pulled him down for a kiss, "I think it was the best business decision we ever made." Chapter 11. The new terms of engagement. The victory in the boardroom changed everything, but it was the silence of the Madison Park house that brought the real shift. For the first time since their frantic meeting at the courthouse, Clara and Ethan weren't fighting a war. The greedy step-uncle had backed down. Victoria had retreated to her estate in Palm Springs to lick her wounds, and Julian had been quietly reassigned to a minor regional office in the Midwest, far enough away to ensure Clara would never have to breathe the same air as him again. The contract that had bound them together was now just a piece of paper sitting in Ethan's desk drawer, completely obsolete. It was a warm June evening when Clara decided it was time to officially address the elephant in the room. She found Ethan in his home library, a glass of scotch resting on the desk beside a stack of global acquisition reports. He had shed his tie, and the top buttons of his black shirt were undone, giving him an uncharacteristically relaxed air. "We need to talk about the contract," Clara said, stepping into the room. Ethan looked up, his gray eyes darkening slightly. He set his pen down, his posture turning entirely focused on her. "What about it?" Clara walked over to the desk, sliding a familiar manila folder onto the mahogany surface. "The 2-year dissolution clause. It's still in there. Legally, if either of our legal teams decides to look closely at our original filing, the framework is still technically based on an expiration date." Ethan stood up slowly, towering over her, but the intensity in his gaze wasn't cold. It was fiercely possessive. He didn't look at the folder. He kept his eyes locked onto hers. "Do you want to dissolve it, Clara?" "No," she said, her voice steady and breathless all at once. "I want to burn it." A slow, devastating smile broke across Ethan's face. He reached out, his long fingers wrapping around the folder, and without a single word, he walked over to the modern, glass-enclosed fireplace in the corner of the room. With a quick flick of his wrist, he tossed the document into the flames. They watched in silence as the legal jargon, the strict separation of assets, and the mandatory divorce clause curled into black ash. Ethan turned back to her, stepping close enough that Clara could feel the heat radiating from him. "There is no exit strategy anymore, Clara. You're stuck with me." "Good," she murmured, reaching up to wrap her hands around his neck, "because I'm just getting started." Chapter 12. A Shared Horizon. 6 months later, the Lenti estate was thriving in ways Clara's grandfather could have only dreamed of. The partnership with Vance Logistics had streamlined everything, and Lin Premium Tea was now being served in luxury hotels from Seattle to Tokyo. But despite their massive corporate successes, the moments that mattered most to Clara were the quiet ones. It was a Saturday morning, and the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Madison Park house let in the bright, golden winter sunlight. Clara was sitting at the kitchen island, mapping out the architecture for a new eco-friendly processing plant on the estate grounds. Ethan walked into the kitchen, wearing gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt, a rare, casual look that Clara had grown to absolutely adore. He held 2 mugs of tea, setting one down next to her laptop, before leaning over to kiss the top of her head. The board approved the funding for the new sustainable infrastructure project, Ethan said, pulling out the stool next to her. You officially have a green light to build the expansion. Clara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. My grandfather would have loved this. He always said that the land gives back exactly what you put into it. He was a smart man, Ethan murmured, his hand finding hers and intertwining their fingers. The heavy emerald-cut diamond on her finger caught the morning sun, throwing brilliant fractured patterns against the marble counter. Clara looked at the ring, then up at the man who had given it to her. She thought about how terrifyingly close she had come to losing everything on her 28th birthday, and how an act of absolute desperation had led her to the safest, most profound love of her life. What are you thinking about? Ethan asked, his thumb gently tracing the back of her hand. Just how unpredictable life is, Clara said softly. If Julian hadn't sent that text, if you hadn't been sitting on that bench, if I had just walked away. Ethan pulled her closer, his lips brushing her temple. I don't believe in coincidences, Clara. I told you before, I believe in execution. The moment I saw you standing by that window, fighting for your legacy, I knew I was never going to let you walk out of that building alone. He turned her chin up gently, forcing her to look into his stormy gray eyes, which were now filled with a warmth reserved only for her. You were never a stranger, Clara, he whispered against her lips. You were just the part of my life I hadn't found yet. And as he kissed her, slow and deep, under the clear Seattle sky, Clara knew that their sudden, chaotic beginning had transformed into a beautiful, unyielding forever.